Welcome to Ab Immemorabili, from Time Beyond Memory. I'm Drake.
And I'm Holly. Where ancient wisdom meets modern minds.
Brought to you by the most ancient anamnetic order of Trikala, for seekers everywhere, whether you're walking with us or simply curious about the path.
Each episode, we explore the hidden patterns that connect philosophy, consciousness, and human transformation.
Drawing from traditions east and west, old and new, familiar and forgotten.
Because some truths exist outside of time, waiting to be remembered, not learned.
On this episode, we're exploring one of history's greatest tragedies, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and what it reveals about the fragility of human knowledge and the wisdom we've lost along the way.
Drake, there's something haunting about the image of the Library of Alexandria in flames, isn't there? It's become almost mythical in our collective imagination.
Absolutely. But here's what fascinates me. Most people don't realize the library didn't burn just once. It suffered multiple destructions over centuries. Julius Caesar accidentally set fire to part of it in 48 BCE during his civil war. Then there were attacks during the reign of Emperor Aurelian around 270 CE. The daughter library at the Serapeum was destroyed in 391 CE by Christian zealots. And some say the final blow came with the Arab conquest in 641 CE.
So it wasn't one dramatic moment, but a slow bleeding of knowledge over time. That's somehow even more tragic.
And it speaks to something profound about the nature of knowledge itself. How vulnerable it is. How easily wisdom accumulated over millennia can simply vanish.
The way we imagine it, this great conflagration consuming all human knowledge in one terrible moment, that's more psychologically satisfying than the truth, isn't it? We want our tragedies to be dramatic, singular. But the reality is that wisdom often dies by 1,000 cuts.
And each cut seemed reasonable at the time. Caesar didn't mean to burn the library. He was burning ships in the harbour, and the fire spread. The Christians who destroyed the Serapeum thought they were destroying paganism, not knowledge. Each destruction had its logic, its justification.
That's what makes it so relevant to our times. We're not immune to this. Every age thinks it has good reasons for what it destroys or neglects. We look back and say, how could they burn the Library of Alexandria? While we let languages die, traditions fade, entire ways of knowing disappear.
There's an estimate that we lose a language every 2 weeks. Each one carries unique knowledge about the world, about consciousness, about being human. That's a library burning every fortnight, and we barely notice.
Let's talk about what was actually in there. Because when people hear Library of Alexandria, they often imagine just scrolls of philosophy and poetry. But it was so much more, wasn't it?
The library was essentially humanity's first attempt at creating a complete repository of all human knowledge. The Ptolemaic rulers who founded it around 295 BCE had this audacious goal: to collect every book in the world. They'd even confiscate texts from ships entering Alexandria's harbour, copy them, and keep the originals.
Rather cheeky of them.
Indeed. But think about what that meant. We're talking about mathematical treatises that might have accelerated scientific progress by centuries. Medical texts from traditions we've completely lost. Astronomical observations and calculations. Historical accounts of civilizations we now know only through fragments.
I've read that we lost the complete works of Aristotle. We only have about 1/3 of what he actually wrote.
Exactly. And consider this: the Greek tragedians. Aeschylus wrote between 70 and 90 plays. We have 7. Sophocles wrote over 120 plays. We have 7. Euripides wrote 92 plays. We have 18 or 19, depending on authenticity debates.
My God, we're seeing these civilizations through a keyhole.
A keyhole. That's the perfect metaphor. And it's not just the Greeks. The library housed texts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, Persia. There were Zoroastrian texts, Buddhist manuscripts, Hebrew scriptures in versions we've never seen. The librarians were translating works between languages, creating the first truly multicultural exchange of ideas.
And think about the commentaries that were lost. Ancient scholars didn't just collect texts. They wrote extensive analyses, cross-references, comparative studies. Imagine having Aristotle's own notes on Plato, or Egyptian priests' interpretations of their mysteries, or Indian mathematicians explaining their methods.
We know that Callimachus created the Pinnaces, a 120 scroll catalogue of all the works in the library, organized by subject and including biographical information about authors. That catalogue alone would revolutionize our understanding of ancient literature and science. It's gone. Completely gone.
This connects to something I've been thinking about: how different our understanding of ancient philosophy might be if we had those complete works. Like, we base entire philosophical schools on fragments and summaries written by critics.
Precisely. Take the pre Socratics. We know Heraclitus through about 130 fragments, Empedocles through 450 lines of poetry. These were prolific thinkers who wrote extensively and were reconstructing their entire philosophical systems from scraps.
It's like trying to understand Shakespeare if all we had were a few famous quotes and some critics' review saying he wrote about Danish princes and Scottish kings.
And here's what really gets me: there were entire schools of thought that we know existed but have completely lost. The library contained works from the Pythagorean, mathematical, mystical tradition that went far beyond what we've recovered. There were texts on Egyptian sacred geometry, Babylonian astronomy that predated Greek work by millennia, Indian mathematical concepts that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance.
The library also had something extraordinary: the Mausion, or Shrine of the Muses, which was essentially the world's first research institute. Scholars were paid salaries, given free food and lodging, exempted from taxes. They could dedicate their entire lives to study and research.
And they made incredible discoveries. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth to remarkable accuracy. Herophilus performed human dissections and mapped the nervous system. Euclid wrote his elements there. These weren't just librarians, they were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge.
The mechanical devices, too. Hero of Alexandria invented the first steam engine, automatic doors, programmable robots. We only know about these through later descriptions. Imagine if we had his complete works, his notes, his failed experiments. We might have had an industrial revolution in ancient times.
That's a profound point. The library wasn't just preserving the past, it was creating the future. And when it burned, we lost both.
Let's broaden this out, though, because Alexandria wasn't the only great library lost to history. The destruction of centers of learning is a recurring human tragedy.
The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, destroyed by the Mongols in 1258.
They say the Tigris River ran black with ink for 6 months from all the books thrown in.
The Library of Nalanda in India, one of the world's first universities, operating from the 5th century CE, burned by invaders in 1193. It supposedly burned for 3 months because there were so many manuscripts.
3 months? The scale of loss is incomprehensible. Nalanda housed Buddhist texts, but also Hindu philosophy, logic, grammar, medicine, mathematics, astronomy. It was where scholars from across Asia came to study.
The library at Ctesiphon in Persia, destroyed during the Arab conquest. The Imperial Library of Constantinople, sacked during the Fourth Crusade. The Aztec and Maya codices, burned by Spanish conquistadors, each one a catastrophe for human knowledge.
The Maya example is particularly heartbreaking. They had developed sophisticated mathematics, astronomy, and writing systems. The Spanish bishop Diego de Landa burned thousands of their books in 1562, saying they contained lies of the devil. We have four Maya codices surviving today.
4 books from an entire civilization. And from those 4, we've learned they had calculated the length of the solar year more accurately than the European calendar of their time. They had developed the concept of zero independently. Imagine what was in the thousands that burned.
And here's something people don't often consider. These weren't just repositories of books. They were living centers of scholarship. When you destroy a library, you're not just burning books. You're destroying the community of scholars, the oral traditions, the teaching lineages, the methods of interpretation passed from master to student.
That's such a crucial point. Because so much ancient knowledge wasn't even written down. It was transmitted orally, person to person. When the Library of Alexandria fell, we didn't just lose the scrolls, we lost the librarians who knew how to read them, interpret them, contextualize them.
The contextual knowledge is irreplaceable. Knowing that 2 texts should be read together, or that one author was responding to another, or that a certain passage was considered controversial. All those connections, those webs of meaning, gone.
This brings us to something fundamental about the nature of knowledge itself. We modern people tend to think of knowledge as information, data that can be stored, copied, backed up. But ancient traditions understood knowledge differently.
How so?
Well, take the Vedic tradition in India. The Vedas were transmitted orally for over 1,000 years before being written down. And this wasn't because they lacked writing, it was intentional. They believed that sacred knowledge required a living transmission, teacher to student, with all the nuance and understanding that comes from that relationship.
The knowledge was embodied, not just recorded.
Exactly. And when you understand that, the loss of these libraries becomes even more profound. It's not just that we lost books, we lost entire ways of knowing.
The Druids had the same approach. They refused to write down their sacred knowledge, believing it needed to be earned through years of study and memorization. When the Romans destroyed the Druid colleges, that entire tradition vanished. No library to burn, but the loss was just as complete.
And ironically, their caution about writing may have ensured their knowledge died completely, while traditions that did write things down at least left fragments for us to find.
Unless, and this is something the Order suggests, unless some of that knowledge was preserved in other ways, hidden in symbols, encoded in myths, preserved in practices that survived even when their original meaning was forgotten.
That's a fascinating possibility. That knowledge might survive in forms we don't recognize as knowledge. Folk traditions, fairy tales, religious rituals that preserve ancient wisdom without the practitioners even knowing it.
Like how Christmas trees might preserve ancient tree worship practices, or how certain meditation techniques appear across cultures that had no apparent contact.
There's an interesting parallel to our current moment, isn't there? We're living through our own kind of knowledge crisis.
You mean the digital age?
Precisely. We assume everything is preserved now because it's digital, but digital preservation might be even more fragile than physical books. File formats become obsolete. Servers fail. Companies go bankrupt and their databases disappear. We're creating vast amounts of information that might be completely inaccessible in 50 years.
The irony is staggering. We have more information than ever before in history, but it might also be more ephemeral than ever. At least a physical book, if protected from fire and water, can last centuries. But a hard drive, a cloud server.
I read recently that NASA has data from early space missions that they can't access anymore because the machines that read those formats no longer exist. We're talking about data from the 60s and 70s, not ancient history, already unreadable.
And what about link rot? Studies show that about 50% of URLs cited in Supreme Court opinions are now dead links. Academic papers citing web sources find those sources gone within a few years. We're building our knowledge on quicksand.
Then there's the problem of information manipulation. At least with physical books, forgery was difficult, but digital information can be altered invisibly, constantly. We might not just lose knowledge, we might have it transformed without even knowing.
And there's another layer, the problem of information overload. The Library of Alexandria aimed to contain all human knowledge, which was ambitious but theoretically possible then. Now, the amount of information generated daily would overflow any physical library.
Which raises the question, is there wisdom we're losing not through destruction, but through drowning in noise? When everything is preserved, nothing is sacred. When all information is equally accessible, how do we identify what's truly important?
That's where the ancient model of knowledge transmission becomes relevant again. The Order often speaks about this, the difference between information and transformation. You can download all the philosophical texts ever written, but without a guide, without a practice, without a community, what do you really have?
Surface knowledge without depth, information without integration.
We're glutted with information but starved for wisdom. We have more access to philosophy than any generation in history, yet rates of anxiety, depression, meaninglessness are at all-time highs.
Because information isn't wisdom. Wisdom is information plus experience plus reflection plus integration. It's a process, not a product. And that process is what we're losing in our age of instant access.
The ancient libraries understood this. They weren't just warehouses of scrolls. They were communities of learning, with masters and students, discussion and debate, practice and application.
The Alexandrian scholars didn't just read medical texts, they performed dissections. They didn't just study astronomy, they made observations. They didn't just copy philosophical works, they lived philosophical lives.
Let's talk about recovery, though, because it's not all loss. Archaeologists and scholars have made remarkable discoveries: the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum.
Oh, Herculaneum is extraordinary. An entire library, carbonized by the eruption of Vesuvius, and we're now using advanced imaging technology to read scrolls that can't even be unrolled without destroying them.
What have they found?
Mostly Epicurean philosophical texts so far, but they've only examined a fraction of what's there. There could be lost works of ancient literature, history, science. It's like the Library of Alexandria in miniature, frozen in time.
The technology is remarkable. Using particle accelerators and AI to read texts that haven't been opened for 2,000 years. It's like we're developing archaeological tools that might let us recover some of what was lost.
And the Nag Hammadi texts completely transformed our understanding of early Christianity and Gnosticism. These were texts deliberately hidden to preserve them from destruction, found by accident in 1945.
Which raises an interesting point about the preservation of knowledge. Sometimes wisdom survives not in grand libraries, but in hidden caches, protected by those who recognized their value. The Hermetic texts, the alchemical manuscripts, the mystical traditions, they survived precisely because they went underground.
The Order speaks about this, how genuine wisdom has always had both an exoteric, public face and an esoteric, hidden dimension. Perhaps some knowledge is meant to be hidden, revealed only to those ready to receive it.
That's a provocative thought. Maybe the myth of the Library of Alexandria serves a purpose beyond historical fact. It reminds us that knowledge is precious, fragile, and must be actively preserved and transmitted.
And maybe some knowledge had to be lost for other knowledge to emerge. If we still had all the ancient texts on astrology, would astronomy have developed? If we had complete alchemical libraries, would chemistry have emerged?
That's a disturbing thought. That progress might require forgetting as much as remembering.
Or perhaps it's about cycles. Knowledge emerges, develops, becomes rigid, dies, and then re-emerges in new forms. The phoenix myth applied to wisdom itself.
The Hindus have a concept for this: the yugas, cycles of time where knowledge is gained and lost in great cosmic rhythms. They believe we're currently in the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, where spiritual knowledge is at its lowest ebb.
But even in the Kali Yuga, seeds of wisdom are preserved for the next cycle, hidden in traditions, encoded in practices, waiting to sprout when conditions are right.
I want to return to something you mentioned earlier, the myth of progress. Because there's this assumption in our culture that we're always moving forward, always advancing. But the loss of these libraries suggests something different.
Yes, we assume we know more than our ancestors, but in many ways, we might know less. Ancient Egyptians performed successful brain surgery. Romans made concrete that's lasted 2,000 years, while our modern concrete degrades in decades. There were mathematical concepts in ancient India and Mesopotamia that we've only discovered recently.
It's humbling, really. Each civilization thinks it's the pinnacle of human achievement, but we're constantly rediscovering what was already known.
The Antikythera mechanism, that ancient Greek device found in a shipwreck, it's an analog computer from around 100 BCE that could calculate astronomical positions decades in advance. We didn't build anything that sophisticated again until the 14th century.
1,400 years to rediscover what had been lost, and that was just one device that happened to survive in a shipwreck. What else did they have? What other technologies, philosophies, understandings did we lose and haven't yet rediscovered?
The Sanskrit term Veda literally means knowledge, but it carries the connotation of rediscovery, uncovering what was always there. Perhaps that's the real lesson of Alexandria. Knowledge isn't linear progress, but a spiral. We keep returning to the same truths at different levels of understanding.
And maybe that's why certain wisdom traditions emphasize oral transmission and embodied practice over written texts. They recognized that true knowledge can't be destroyed by fire because it lives in the practitioners themselves.
The Stoics had a concept for this: the inner citadel. No matter what external catastrophes occur, The philosophical practitioner carries their wisdom within, indestructible.
though that assumes someone is there to carry it forward. When the last speaker of a language dies, when the last practitioner of a tradition passes without students,
Then we have another Alexandria, a silent burning.
there's something else we haven't discussed: the deliberate destruction of knowledge. Because not all these losses were accidents or casualties of war. Some were intentional suppressions.
The burning of heretical texts by various religions, the destruction of indigenous knowledge by colonizers, the suppression of women's writing and scholarship throughout history.
Sappho, one of the greatest poets of antiquity. We have maybe one complete poem and fragments of others. Her work was deliberately suppressed because of its homosexual themes. 9 books of poetry reduced to scraps.
The Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang's burning of books and burying of scholars in 213 BCE. He wanted to control history, to make it seem like civilization began with his dynasty.
And it partially worked. So much of pre-Qin Chinese philosophy and history was lost. We know Confucius and Laozi mainly because their followers hid texts or memorized them and rewrote them later.
This pattern repeats throughout history. Those in power trying to control knowledge, to erase inconvenient truths, to rewrite history, and often succeeding, at least partially.
Which makes you wonder, what truths have been successfully suppressed? What wisdom was so threatening that it had to be completely eliminated? We wouldn't even know what we don't know.
The order suggests that some knowledge was hidden rather than destroyed, that mystery schools and secret societies preserved truths that couldn't be spoken publicly, the real teachings concealed behind allegory and symbol.
Like how alchemical texts used chemical processes as metaphors for spiritual transformation. Even if you had the text, without the key to interpretation, you'd think it was just about making gold.
Exactly. Knowledge hiding in plain sight. Perhaps some of what burned in Alexandria was intentionally encoded elsewhere, waiting for those with eyes to see.
So what do we do with this knowledge of loss? How do we respond to understanding how much wisdom has vanished?
I think first, we cultivate humility. We're not the culmination of human achievement. We're one moment in an ongoing conversation, and we've lost many of the earlier voices.
And second, perhaps we become more intentional about preservation, not just of information, but of wisdom, traditions, practice, ways of knowing.
The order teaches something relevant here, that we're each responsible for becoming a living library. Not just collecting information, but embodying wisdom, making it part of our being so it can't be lost.
That's beautiful. Each person as a repository of knowledge, connected to others in a network of understanding.
Like Indra's net from Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, each jewel reflecting all the others, no single point of failure.
And maybe that's the ultimate response to Alexandria. Not to build another grand centralized library that can burn, but to distribute wisdom widely, embed it in communities, encode it in practices and traditions that can survive catastrophe.
To make knowledge anti-fragile, as Nassim Taleb would say. Not just resistant to destruction, but actually strengthened by challenges.
The internet was supposed to be this, a distributed network where information couldn't be destroyed. But we've centralized it again. Most people's internet experience goes through a handful of companies. We've rebuilt Alexandria in silicon and glass.
And it's just as vulnerable, maybe more so. A solar flare, an electromagnetic pulse, a coordinated cyber attack. Our entire digital civilization could vanish in moments.
Which brings us back to the ancient wisdom of embodied knowledge. Skills you can't forget. Wisdom that lives in your bones. Practices that transform you so fundamentally that they can't be taken away.
That's what the mystery schools were creating. Not students who had memorized texts, but initiates who had been transformed by knowledge, who had become the knowledge.
There's one more aspect I want to explore, the mythology we've built around Alexandria, because the story of its burning has become almost more powerful than the historical facts.
You mean how it's become a symbol for the fragility of civilization itself?
Exactly. Carl Sagan called it the last glimmer of the enlightenment of antiquity. But that narrative might actually obscure something important.
Which is?
That knowledge never really resided in a single place. While we mourn Alexandria, there were libraries in Athens, Pergamon, Rome, Constantinople. Indian universities like Takshashila, Chinese imperial libraries, the Islamic libraries of Timbuktu. Knowledge was always distributed, always flowing.
So, the myth of Alexandria as the sole repository of ancient wisdom might actually prevent us from seeing the fuller picture. That human knowledge has always been a distributed network, not a single archive.
And that network is more resilient than we might think. Yes, we've lost tremendous amounts, but look at what's survived. The Pythagorean theorem, Stoic practices, Buddhist meditation, Platonic philosophy. These ideas have survived millennia, wars, catastrophes.
Because they were never just stored, they were lived, practiced, transmitted from person to person.
The ideas that survive are the ones that transform people. No one preserves useless knowledge through dark ages and catastrophes. But transformative wisdom? People will hide it, memorize it, die for it.
Which suggests a kind of natural selection of ideas. The knowledge that survives is the knowledge that matters, that changes lives, that's worth preserving at great cost.
Though that's also a bit troubling, isn't it? Because it means practical wisdom might survive while theoretical knowledge, which might become practical later, gets lost.
True. How many scientific discoveries were made, lost, and had to be remade? How many mathematical proofs, astronomical observations, medical treatments?
The Library of Alexandria had a section called the Serapeum that focused on religious and philosophical texts. When it was destroyed, the Christians who burned it thought they were destroying paganism. They didn't realize they were destroying irreplaceable historical records, scientific observations, medical knowledge that happened to be housed in the same building.
That narrow vision, seeing only what threatens your worldview and not the larger tapestry of human knowledge. It's happening today with the defunding of humanities departments, the closing of libraries, the idea that only practical knowledge matters.
Every generation thinks it knows what knowledge is worth preserving, and every generation is wrong in ways it can't imagine.
Which brings us full circle, doesn't it? The real tragedy of Alexandria isn't just about books burning. It's about the reminder that knowledge requires active cultivation. It doesn't preserve itself.
In our tradition, we speak of anamnesis, not learning but remembering. Perhaps every generation has to rediscover the same truths, make them live again. The fire of Alexandria keeps burning because we keep forgetting and remembering, losing and finding.
And maybe that's the deepest lesson. Not that knowledge is fragile, but that it's resilient. If we commit to being its carriers, its embodiment, its living expression.
Every time we engage with a philosophical text, not just reading but practicing, we're rebuilding Alexandria. Every time we pass on wisdom, not just information but transformation, we're adding to the eternal library.
The library that can't burn because it exists in consciousness itself, distributed across all seekers, all practitioners, all those who remember.
And that's what the order is, really. Not a building full of books, but a living tradition of transformation. Each member a volume in the eternal library, each practice a preserved teaching.
Ab immemorabili, from time beyond memory, not because the knowledge is old, but because it exists outside of time, constantly being destroyed and reborn, forgotten and remembered.
The burning of Alexandria wasn't the end of ancient wisdom, it was a transformation. The knowledge that mattered found new forms, new voices, new embodiments.
And it continues to do so. Every time someone truly engages with wisdom, allows it to transform them, and passes it on, Alexandria rises from its ashes.
The Phoenix Library, eternal and ever burning, ever renewed.
Perhaps that's the ultimate teaching. Not to mourn what was lost, but to become what needs to be preserved. Not to build libraries, but to become them.
To be the knowledge that can't burn.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration.
Ab immemorabili, from time beyond memory.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing.
And remember, the wisdom you seek has always been within you.
You're not learning it.
You're remembering it.